It's been almost 25 years since most of us first heard the name Vladimir Putin. Much has changed in the world over that period, but not everything has been for the better. Russia was, and still remains, a profoundly corrupt and politically oppressive country. Will it ever change? Good evening. My name is Mateusz Mazzini, and this is a very special edition of Wider View. When Vladimir Putin was sworn in as the president of Russia for the first time in May of 2000, very few expected him to last this long. His career in the KGB quickly made headlines in the international press, but nobody assumed he would bring the agency's methods into his own style of governance. He was younger, smarter, more presentable. What could possibly go wrong? In fact, everything did. Fast forward to 2024, and you see Russia becoming a complete democratic desert. All the leading opposition figures are either dead or exiled, with no way of returning home. Russia is cozying up to the likes of Iran, North Korea, and China, and uses nuclear blackmail against the West on a regular basis. How did we get here? And how did Vladimir Putin consolidate his power so efficiently? We explore these topics in our next report.
2024 marks the 24th year of Vladimir Putin's rule of the Russian Federation. During that period, he's fluctuated between serving as the country's president and prime minister. But it's always been clear to everyone that it was him pulling the strings. Since his early days in power, Putin has quashed dissent, silenced free media, and meticulously eliminated anyone who opposed him. Parallel to his domestic democratic backsliding, he ushered in a new era of Russian imperialism abroad. A brutal intervention in Chechnya in 2000 and the 2008 incursion into Georgia were only the early stages of that. In 2014, the Russian military took the Crimean Peninsula, claiming its necessary reconnection with the Russian motherland. They also occupied the eastern Ukrainian regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, allegedly in defense of persecuted Russian minorities there. The apex of Putin's imperialism materialized on the 22nd of February 2022, when Russian troops crossed further into Ukraine. A full-scale invasion began, one that Putin hoped he would finish in days with a total victory. But Ukrainians put up fierce resistance, and the West came to their aid, throwing a wrench in Russia's imperial ambitions. Over his quarter-century in power, Putin has developed a complex relationship with the West. Numerous European and American leaders were baited by his promise of economic opening and political modernization. Germany's Gerhard Schröder and Angela Merkel were convinced that increasing international trade would bring about democratization in Russia. Barack Obama, during his first term as US president, appealed for flexibility and common sense in relations with Moscow.
I want to be as clear as I can on this. Prejudice and discrimination helps isolate.
Even clear violations of international law weren't enough to dispel the illusions liberal politicians held about Putin. Meanwhile, the scale of terror and persecution of political enemies under his leadership grew by the day. Critics of Putin's policies were imprisoned, exiled, and often simply executed. Mikhail, a former oligarch turned civil society activist, was imprisoned for 9 years on fraud charges. Anna Politkovska, a leading investigative journalist, was shot in broad daylight outside her apartment on Putin's birthday. Sliding into authoritarianism, the Russian state became synonymous with politically motivated repression. Putin developed a network of friendly actors abroad and agents of influence planted in the West. The European far-right and populist parties acted in his interest, weakening the unity of the European Union. They also undermined trust in NATO, advocating for peace talks with Ukraine as soon as possible. Under Putin's watch, an alternative international system began to take shape based on mutual hatred to Western liberal democracy. And while now the West seems to know everything about the Russian leader, it is still unable to contain him.
Did the West finally learn to read Vladimir Putin? What's next for Russia when he's gone? And finally, who could bring about change to this country? I will look for answers to these questions with a very special guest in our studio. Joining me tonight is former Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, Mikhail Kasyanov. Mr. Kasyanov, good evening and welcome to Wider View.
Good evening.
Mr. Kasyanov, I wanted to begin with a retrospect back into the years when you were Prime Minister. You served as the first Prime Minister under Vladimir Putin as the president in the years 2000 to 2004. When you look at him right now, is he very much a different politician? What's different? What's changed about him?
Oh, that's completely two different Putins. And that time, Putin, who came to Moscow and appeared to be just on the top on Russian leadership, top of politics, he was completely different. He supported all the reform my cabinet initiated at that time. And there was any sign of some kind of, I would say, violations of international law, what is happening every day now. And that time we have excellent relations with the European Union. At that time we had very excellent relations with the United States. We established a Russia-NATO Special Council. That was step for cooperation. It was absolutely, I would say, prosperous time in that period.
But do you think that there was a sincere position on behalf of Putin, or was it just a preparation to what came about after?
That's to look at this retrospectively. We can say that Putin pretended at that time to be a democratically devoted person. And the majority of people in 2000 voted for him. He got, that time was the only real elections. Putin got 52% in March 2000. And President Yeltsin supported Putin and appointed him as a prime minister and supported him for presidential elections. And people believed that Putin, with his energy as a young person, will continue democratic reforms. And that was first 4 years of our joint, I would say, job together just in the leadership of the country.
We're going to follow up on this. I'm going to interrupt you.
We achieved a lot in that time. But what has happened afterwards, just Putin wanted to get a special ticket from the West to, I would say, to interpret democracy in the way he wanted. As we understand now, he was and continued to be a KGB officer with this vision of the world.
Well, whether he got that special ticket with the West and why, we're going to get to that in a second, but I wanted to touch upon foreign policy. When you were Prime Minister, he was President, was he already, back 20 years ago, displaying imperialist ambitions and perspectives in the way he foresaw the future of Russia?
I'll tell you frankly, in terms of international relations, that I was absolutely not, was absolutely great, I would say, developments. The only thing what I already noticed at that time, that his negative attitude to Ukraine, for instance.
And how did how did he manifest that?
First of all, because
attitude?
in my time, and that time, I negotiated everything with the Ukrainian government as on an equal footing. And given them just some kind of privileges, just reduce tariffs so that to open Russian market more for Ukrainian industries, etc. And Putin just started, I wouldn't say criticize, but telling me, what for you doing this? Why you're treating them as equal partner? They should be subordinated as our young sister or something like this. That was the only what I can recall and fix that it was really the issue just in terms of relations to Ukraine.
So let's flip that table a little bit and talk about Western leaders. You mentioned that a little bit already, but when you look at the situation, the perception of Vladimir Putin in the West, there's no illusion anymore, especially after the full-scale invasion in Ukraine. Do you feel like the West finally has got a good reading and of Vladimir Putin as a politician?
I think right now it's absolutely clear. No one is going to shake his hands, and I think just nobody will just accept him and return to relations with him as business as usual. That has happened after invasion of Georgia. It was a surprise for me at that time. 3 months after just signing just the ceasefire agreement, Putin didn't implement anything, but the whole West came back to Putin, shaking his hands, and just conducted the business as usual.
Well, that wasn't just about Georgia. After the annexation of Crimea, we saw pretty much the same development.
That's what just following just Crimea appeared afterwards. Putin, after Georgia, understood that's just the ticket the West given to him. That it's possible to behave this way, and that's what appeared just Crimea, annexation of Crimea. Reaction of the West was slight.
Mm-hmm. So what makes you feel this time about will be different?
Yeah, that's what we see now. Putin makes what the West given to him, allowed him to do. As much as the West allows, he does. Putin does. That's what we have now. We cannot afford Putin to destroy the whole liberal order which was established after the Second World War. But he is trying to destroy everything. He already destroyed the whole architecture of European security. Now he's saying just let's to discuss everything with the beginning.
So what do you think was the critical moment that actually pushed him towards the invasion? Because many people in the West, including the former head of the Defense Department in the United States, Leon Panetta, say he wasn't calculating a coordinated response of the West on behalf of Ukraine. He expected no support. He expected a broken West, uncoordinated diplomatic negotiations. Do you think he got surprised by the outcome?
I think that was the right explanation to the great extent. Just Putin believes, until now believes, that nuclear power, that's a serious issue in his hands. And he believes that blackmailing the West by using, I would say, blackmailing by nuclear power, just he gets some kind of concessions. That's why just he believes that the West will not step in just on a wider scale just to support Ukraine. But I will emphasize, just talking about the war, that the West could finish this war within I wouldn't say tomorrow, but within 1 year. If the support of Ukraine would be doubled, I just emphasize doubled. In this case, Putin will face with severe problems just already in a few months economically. Just economy and financial system, state finance will not last long. Stability will not last long.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because that appears to be the great mystery that we in the West are unable to solve. We have put so many sanctions on the Russian economy, yet somehow, miraculously, they still keep going, still producing armament, still able to finance the war machine. Right now, Putin has just recently announced a 25% planned increase in defense spending. Is this a disparity between what we see in the West and what's actually happening in the Russian economy?
Military spending this year and for next year will be a little bit more than 6% of GDP. That's a lot, but it's not tragic.
Well, Poland has over 4%.
Israel just spending 5% of GDP for years and years, and it's not serious. It's not serious problem. But Putin spends right now just $170 billion for the war, while Ukraine, with the whole support, 120 maximum. Putin has advantage in finance, in military supplies, and human resource. Just Ukraine cannot have an advantage in human resource, but can have advantage in the military equipment. And that's what West can do. If the support will be increased by doubled, in this case, Putin will have to level up his expenditure. That will be not 6.5%, that will be 15% of GDP.
And will he be able to meet that target?
That is the way to disaster. In this case, the whole machine would not operate as it is now. Just Putin would definitely will come to the defeat, to be defeated.
But would that happen because of domestic economic pressure, people being unhappy with the situation in their personal finances?
Not because of people, because of inability of Putin to finance the war. and just to be defeated on the battlefield, that would combination would bring Ukraine for victory, and it will trigger the changes in Russia. As soon as people see Putin as weak, as defeated, just changes will start immediately inside the whole bureaucratic machine, and ordinary people would see him as not already as a leader.
So let's talk about people actually for a second, because in our opening material we saw the graph that displays public approval to Vladimir Putin over the course of the last decade. We saw it fluctuates mostly due to different wars and economic cycles. But does it really make any sense whatsoever to measure public approval of an autocratic leader in a system so watertight that he can actually control almost all aspects of the political sphere?
It is useful to measure, but if you can measure. But today, in this situation, we already have not authoritarian, we already have totalitarian regime. And the main instrument of in hands of Putin just ruling the country, that's fear. People are afraid. People have just live in an atmosphere of fear. They cannot answer the question in a sociological polls, just their own answer. They would like they wouldn't like, they don't answer or just saying what they expect authorities would like to hear, so that not to create trouble for themselves.
So who could get rid of that overwhelming societal fear? Because when you look at the stage of the Russian anti-Putin opposition, the leadership is decimated. Alexei Navalny is dead. Kara-Murza is exiled. Ilya Yashin is exiled. You yourself cannot come back to Russia. Is there anybody who could bring about a change from within?
It's not about the leadership of opposition. The issue is just the general perception of population and the whole so-called Putin's elite, a bureaucratic machine. Just the only changes can start if Ukraine is just won the battle and Putin seen by people as defeated. In this case, just the automatic changes will start, and all this bureaucratic machine will not implement Putin's decisions, and people will start freely speaking in the streets. I'm sure that historical examples just demonstrate that. That's what the trigger for changes in Russia, that's Ukrainians' victory.
So let's talk about a possible scenario for the day after. One day, sooner or later, he's gone. He cannot go on forever as president of the Russian Federation. What happens after? Because many people in the West actually are of the opinion that whoever takes over the presidency of Russia from Putin will not want to finish the war, because then that person would be immediately seen as a person who begins their rule as a person who lost the war.
That's not correct. First, I would say just Putin put himself in a situation that he had to be a ruler forever, till the end of his days. Even if he is defeated, but the changes will start, as I said. But let's imagine just that Putin disappeared. That is the issue, what you're asking, just who will be instead of him. My answer is absolutely clear. Any other person instead of Putin will be better for situation because of simple reason. This person and the ruling group will start first negotiating, trying to negotiate with the West some kind of restoring relations. They will stop the war. Because no one in Russia, no one, I would say, absolute majority in Russia would like this war to stop. They don't want to be defeated and to feel as defeated and destroyed, but they would like the war to finish. Because just Putin didn't ask anyone, a part of 5 generals, just whether they support the war in a full-scale invasion of Ukraine or not. Putin destroyed life and future for many families, for all Russians.
Pardon me, because that appears to me to be a little bit of a contradiction. On the one hand, we agree that not many people support the notion of war in Ukraine inside the Russian society, but on the other hand, we agree that they wouldn't like to see themselves as those defeated. How do you come about
that is
with that
exactly
result?
the case. That is controversial on the people's mind. educated people who understand what's going on, they simply cannot accept that their country destroy just neighboring independent country and killing.
So how do you plan that
killing
feeling of acceptance?
thousands of people of Ukraine. And Russians just prefer to close their eyes and just not to understand what's going on. Just that is contradiction in their mind. That is the problem.
So is there a way to fix that contradiction?
The way is to stop propaganda. To stop propaganda, we need to change the Putin's regime. That is the long story. That's why I'm coming back to the beginning. We need Ukraine to win this war, so that Putin should be seen as defeated. In this case, just the changes will start. It will be a gradual process. Just democracy in Russia wouldn't come tomorrow. That will take, with the best way, 5-6 years to clean up the people's mind.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Kasyanov, I wanted to ask about your personal status, because since November 2023, you have been officially declared a foreign agent by the authorities in the Kremlin. When you first heard the news, how did that make you feel?
Nothing special, because just it was absolutely evident for me. Just that it took them a year to announce, because just initially information was just that a year before this announcement I was put on a list, but they're expecting Putin's permission whether just former prime minister could be named as foreign agent. It took them a year just to knock to Putin's door and just to report such a minor issue like myself. Yeah, and that was appeared. That for me it was not a real surprise, because of my statements and permanent interactions with the press and society here in Europe. Just that is evident, because for criticism it's
Absolutely.
should be punished, and that is one of the way to do this. Because just in Putin's vision and his people, just normal person couldn't, from their perspective, normal person couldn't be against the authority.
And are you hoping to ever be able to come back to your own country?
This person and their understanding should be either crazy or foreign agent. And they chosen me just to name it foreign agent.
Do you think you'll ever be able to come back to your own country?
I'm sure I will.
When do you think that's going to happen?
War attrition, what Putin conducted right now, couldn't last long. As I said, just if West to make a principled decision that not just to support Ukraine as long as it's needed, as much we can spend as much as needed, but to make a decision, Ukraine should win the war. Putin should be defeated, and to undertake a couple of measures. One of them, I said, to increase support, another one to control the energy market. You cannot stop buying Russian oil because you can nothing to replace, but you can control the price. If the price would be like now, around 70, it means Russian oil costs just less than $60 per barrel. But the budget already built up on an expectation of 70. They're already just running with the bigger deficit than expected. If you increase and last it long, as I said, economic problems just will come tomorrow.
Very straightforward and stark comments. Mikhail Kasyanov, former Prime Minister of the Russian Federation. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
It is impossible to predict the future, and that's certainly not what we have attempted to do tonight. But the West needs to be able to imagine a Russia without Vladimir Putin. Sooner or later, he will be the new reality. Maybe an easier one, maybe an even more challenging one. But something will inevitably change, and Western leaders need to be ready for it, if only to defend their own interests and principles. Thank you for being with us tonight. Next week, we will shed some light on a very much understudied topic, the relationship between India and the European Union. Make sure you're with us next week, and have a good evening.